Okay. Yay. Okay. Hi, everyone. We are back with the last class of basic plant science for the summer semester. Um, Yay. So it's a lot of material to get through in a very short period of time, but you've done it. Now we are going to finish it up today, and I'm excited. So let's get started. And close this first. Okay. So the last time, let me move this. The last class that you guys had was the vascular plants, right? Seed plants and gymnosperms, particularly. We covered the cycads, ginkgo, and the conifers. And we talked about alternation of generations as it pertains to those plants, right? And today we're going to finally talk about the angiosperms. So the angiosperms are the flowering plants. And we're going to talk about why they're significant, which we've already covered in the first class a little bit, what their habits and habitats are, parts of the flower. So flowering plants must have flowers. So we're going to talk about parts of the flower, types of flowers, monocots versus dicot flowers, and then alternation of generations as it pertains to the angiosperms, and finish off with agents of pollination. Okay, so we're in the vascular plants, right? All the plants we've been talking about the last few classes have been in the vascular plants. And so I always like to get oriented and see where we are in the plant kingdom. And last time we were in the gymnosperms, and now we're going to finally be in the angiosperms, right? The flowering plants. So this is it. This is the last stop, right? Look, we've made it all the way through. We've covered the non-vascular plants. Now we're covered the spore-bearing vascular plants, the seed-bearing, naked seed-bearing vascular plants. And now, finally at the end of with angiosperms. Yes. Okay. So angiosperms are important for a lot of reasons, but we'll talk about a few of those reasons today. So number one, it was a huge evolutionary leap in order for plants to have ovules and seeds. And we know that because the majority of plants on Earth today have seeds. They're seed-shedding plants. This is a graphic you saw before, but just to give you an idea, if this is all of the plants that are in the plant kingdom, look at how many in green here are those that shed seeds. So that was a big evolutionary step in order for plants to be successful, right? It really helped if you had seeds and ovules. But even better than just having ovules and seeds is having flowers. So if you look at the graph before and you take just the green part and you split that into gymnosperms and angiosperms, there you go. Look at how many species are angiosperms compared to gymnosperms, right? Only 11,000, give or take, gymnosperms and a whole lot more angiosperms. So it's very, very beneficial for plants to be able to produce flowers because it improves their ability to reproduce. So this should be a bit of a refresh. In the word gymnosperm, as we already covered, it refers to the fact that the ovules and then later the seeds are visible. They are not enclosed in an ovary, right? They're exposed. You can see them with your naked eyes, right? And these are the ones that we've already covered, right? On the left, you have the cycads. This one here looks kind of like a mushroom is also cycad. And this is maybe a good reminder, right? Some cycads have their ovules on leaves that are in a fertile crown, kind of look more like a leaf. Some cycads, since we're talking, might as well review because we have an exam coming up pretty soon. So might as well review. Sorry, there's so much noise outside my window today. Yep, so these are all the plants that we've covered so far, the gymnosperms, and they have naked ovules, right, and later naked seeds. Some cycads have their ovules on a leaf in a fertile crown. Some cycads have their ovules in special shortened leaves on a strobilus. Ginkgo always has its ovules paired on a stalk, right? 2 on one stalk. And then conifers have, as the name conifers tells you, their ovules are on cones, right? So that's what we've covered so far. But the point is here, all of these ovules are visible. Look, you can see this ovule. There it is. There's nothing covering it. It's right out there. There's another one, right? That's the point. In angiosperms, the seed is no longer visible. Sorry, the ovules and then later the seeds are no longer visible with the naked eye because they are enclosed in an ovary. They're in a container, right? Angiosperm, the word angion comes from that Greek word for vessel, right? So it's inside of this vessel, which is the ovary. And so they are not, guys are going to miss my poor drawing. They are not exposed to the environment if you're in the angiosperms. And we've seen this before. It's just to really get it to stick. It's that, right? Gymnosperms, ovules are naked and exposed. Later, seeds are naked and exposed. Angiosperms, ovules are inside of a container, which is called an ovary, right? And here you can see the ovary in kind of a pink color. Okay. So all angiosperms, all 366,000 of them, right, are in the same phylum, which is Magnoliophyta, right? Some of your sources might say Anthophyta. That's an older phylum name. Nowadays, we say Magnoliophyta. And the phylum name is named after this genus of magnolia. So maybe you have magnolia trees growing around your neighborhood, and in spring, you get to see the nice showy flowers. But here's an example of magnolia flowers on the right. And so that genus Magnolia is what gives the name Magnoliophyta for the phylum name of the angiosperms. Right. So if you're in that phylum, you bear flowers. And if you are in that phylum and you bear flowers, then you have your ovules inside of ovaries. And later, the seeds will be inside of fruits. So remember, an ovule contains an egg. And once the egg gets fertilized, the ovule will undergo changes and become a seed, right? In the angiosperms or Magnoliophyta phylum, when those ovules get fertilized inside of the ovary will undergo changes and become a fruit, and the ovule will become a seed inside of that fruit, which we'll see later on in this talk. So, diversity. So much diversity. Angiosperms are by far the most diverse group of plants. Look at all of the different colors and shapes and sizes, and just beautiful array of diversity in the angiosperms. Right? And there's so many, and this is only the ones we know about so far. We discover a new plant species every year. So this is quite a lot of diversity, particularly in shape, but also in the flower shape. And angiosperms are the most prevalent or dominant plant around the world in almost every ecosystem. So in your evergreen forests, in your deciduous forests, in your deserts, etc., angiosperms are the predominant plant, except for, which we learned about last time, except for the circumboreal forests, which are dominated by what again? Covered it in the last class. And the circumboreal forests, that's your northern forests, right? In their northern latitudes. Here they are up here in purple. And that's dominated by conifers. Okay, we already talked about this, but it's important to just reminder that angiosperms are what feed the world. They are the big food source for humans and all other terrestrial animals for the most part. We wouldn't have had civilizations without the domestication of angiosperms, particularly these that we already spoke about in the first class, right? Corn, wheat, barley, and rice, which are all members of the angiosperms and all grasses. So in terms of human civilization, angiosperm is pretty important. Right? We eat a lot of angiosperms. So we like fruits and vegetables. We make oils out of fruits and vegetables and other parts of plants. We eat herbs and spices. And so a lot of our diet revolves around angiosperms. But we also use angiosperms for shelter and for clothing and for fuel for making wine and brewing, medicine, drugs, for cut flowers on Mother's Day, right? All so many different things we use angiosperms for. So now we know what they are. We know how they're important to humans. Let's kind of look at what their forms are like and what habitats you might find them in. So angiosperms, being so diverse, have basically every form that you can think of, right? They have herbs, herbaceous plants, right? They have shrubs that are capable of being woody. They have trees that are capable of being woody. They have lianas and vines, right? All the types of habits we covered in the STEM lab. Some angiosperms can also be epiphytic. This is a term we've seen before. It just means it's a plant that can grow on other plants. So, for example, this orchid growing on this tree. They can be aquatic, meaning they live in water or are submerged underwater sometimes. And they can be parasitic. So this is maybe a new term for us here. Basically, parasitic plants lack chlorophyll. So as you see, this plant on the right here is all white. It's because it doesn't have that pigment chlorophyll in it. And if it doesn't have the pigment chlorophyll, it means it can't make its own glucose, right? It can't use the sun's energy to transform CO2 gas into glucose. It can't because it doesn't have chlorophyll. So they can't make their own food. And what they end up doing in order to survive is they use these special roots that actually enter tissue of other plants and steal the glucose out of their bodies. So we call them parasitic plants. This on the right is called Monotropa uniflora, or ghost pipe or ghost plant. You actually can see it growing in our region, so New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania. It's common in wooded forest type habitats. And when you see it in person, it almost looks like a mushroom, but it actually is a parasitic plant. This is another example of a parasitic plant. Some of you may have seen this before because it is the world's largest single flower. So this is one giant flower, and it's the largest flower that is still living. I'll show you this word down here. Extant just means it's still alive. So extinct, like the dinosaurs are extinct, right? Human beings are extant. We're still here. We are not extinct yet. We are extant. So this flower is the largest single extant or still living flower on Earth, and it's actually a parasitic plant. It's actually a parasitic plant. It has a really, really bad smell. So its common name is the corpse lily because it smells really bad. It's actually pollinated by flies. All right, so so basically it could have any kind of habit for the most part. Angiosperms are that diverse. Where do they live? Pretty much everywhere. Pretty much everywhere. So in your temperate and tropical forests are dominated by angiosperms, right? Dry habitats or xerophytic habitats or environments are dominated by angiosperms. But remember, the conifers were also pretty good in xerophytic environments too because of their leaf shapes. But some angiosperms are cactuses, right? So those do very well in dry environments, as you know. Another place that angiosperms can grow is in your grasslands and savannas. Look at this little guy here, so cute. Alpine regions, so that just means mountainous regions. Freshwater environments, right? Because they can be aquatic plants. Saltwater environments too. Okay, so they can have almost every type of habit. They can have every type of habit, and they can have every type of habitat. So they can have it all, right? Angiosperms are all over. Some of the tallest. So we learned last class that the tallest trees in the world are actually the tallest living trees in the world are actually conifers. But there's some pretty tall angiosperms as well. So the tallest angiosperm are these eucalyptus trees that are located in southeastern Australia. Their common name is the mountain ash. And they can reach around 330 feet tall and around 70 feet wide. 70 feet wide. So that's pretty big. Lots of secondary growth, right? Okay. And the smallest angiosperms are this in this family of plants called the Lemnaceae. So they're only like a few millimeters big, each plant. On the bottom left, you can see a bee. So these are aquatic plants. And you could see a bee standing on a mat of these small plants floating on water such that the bee can like walk on the water. They're commonly known as the duckweeds, but don't get them confused with we saw a fern. Don't worry about that. But this is the smallest angiosperm, just a millimeter wide, super, super small. And you can see it has a worldwide occurrence. So on the bottom right here, you have a map showing all of the occurrence data of plants in Lemnaceae family. And they're pretty much everywhere. And a lot of that has to do with their popularity in aquarium trade, but also the fact that it can get easily stuck to boats and get vectored or bilge water, right? Like a boat takes water in at one location and it could have Lemnaceae in it and put it there. So yeah, but anyway, smallest angiosperm. Okay. Talked about habits and habitats, talked about largest, smallest angiosperms, talked about importance of angiosperms to humans. Now let's talk about parts of the flower. So because angiosperms are vascular, we know that the sporophyte generation is dominant and it has true roots, stems, and leaves. We covered all of this in the shoot system, but just as a reminder, right, we're going to use some of these same terms today. So flowers, angiosperms have all of these parts that we've already covered. And part of that shoot system that we haven't covered yet so far is the flower. So the flower is a specialized part of this shoot system whose leaves are modified specifically for reproduction. And flowers are going to be bearing the sexual reproductive structures. The male structures are called collectively stamens, and the female structures are called collectively pistil or carpals. Either one is fine, whichever you prefer. And on an exam or something, I would have it hyphenated like that for whichever one you, not hyphenated, slashed, for whichever one you guys prefer. All right, so those are the males. Male parts are stamens, female parts are pistils. And let's look at what makes that up. So the pistil or carpals is made up of three things: the stigma, the style, and the ovary. And we'll talk about their functions on subsequent slides. The stamens are made up of an anther and a filament. Then you have the petals of a flower, and then you have the sepals of a flower. So if I were to just, because we are going to go through this on subsequent slides, but if I were to just draw very quickly, if we looked first at the pistil, this is the stigma, is the sticky part on top. Style here, and then ovary. I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. Can I go back? I think I can. Yes. All right. Stamens are anther and filament. Here we'll draw it on another one, but it's not. Here's an anther attached to filament. Petals are these guys here, petals all around. And then lastly, sepals are at the bottom. They almost look like little leaves at the bottom of the flower. So those are the parts of the flower. 4 parts, right? Pistil or carpals, stamens, petals, sepals, 4 parts. And it's important to point out that there are 4 parts because this is something about flower arrangement and how you can talk about one flower versus another flower. So all the parts of the flower are arranged in what are called whorls or circles. So from our previous color scheme that we just did on the previous slide. So this on the left here, you have a diagram of a flower kind of longitudinally, right? Like if you cut the flower like this and you can see inside. On the right, you have a flower that's a cross section of a flower, right? So if like this is a flower and you cut a cross section like that. Let's use the same colors I used on the previous. So we'll look at both. So here is the sepals, right? And I said all the parts of a flower are arranged in these whorls. such that on every flower that has the 4 whorls, you'll have sepals on the outside whorl, petals next, stamens next, and then in the center circle or whorl will be the pistil or carpel. So let's look. Here's the first whorl. Watch, I'm going to draw circles now, so this is going to get a little crazy, right? So there's your sepals. Next, we have petals, which I used red, I think. So here's the petals. And if we were to do cross-section, we'll see the whorl. Here's the, oh boy, here's the petals. Next is the stamens, right? The male parts. We did a cross-section, stamens. And we're into 3 whorls so far. And what color did I use? I think I used dark blue for that 4th whorl, which is the carpal, pistil or carpal, right? So you see there 4 whorls, right, that make up the flower. And it's always this order: sepal on the outside, petals, stamen, pistil, or carpals. Okay. And we'll come back to that whorl thing in a second. So what are the functions? So let's first talk about the pistil or the carpals, right? Pistil or carpals. So the stigma, which is at the tippy tip right here, catches pollen. That's its job. So I always say sticky stigma because it catches pollen. The style is just the thing that holds the stigma out of the flower. Because if you're going to want to catch pollen, you don't want to be all buried. You want to be out and available to be sticky and to catch the pollen, right? And lastly, the ovary, which is hard to see. Well, I kind of drew over it here, but let's say here, there. The ovary, which is going to hold 1 or more ovules, depending on the species. Okay, so that is the pistil or carpals. Stamens have less parts, but still very important. So the anther, which are the, if you've ever gotten lilies delivered or bought lilies for someone, and it gets, after a while, it starts to shed all this, sorry, there's, hold on, sirens. So the anthers are the things that when you get lilies, they kind of make all that dust, and that dust is pollen. So anthers' job is to produce pollen. You can see this flower here has several anthers. There's one hiding behind the stigma there. And then the filament is kind of like the style in that it just holds the anther out of the flower so that pollen can be spread out better. Okay, so that's female parts, and this is male parts. Now we will cover the next whorl. So we're going from the inside of the whorls to the out, right? We started with female, then started with pistil, carpal, and then we did stamens, and now we do petals. Petals are, their main job is to attract pollinators. That's their main job. All the petals taken together we call a corolla. Not like a car, Corolla, but every petal together we call a corolla. But their job is to attract pollinators. Oh, and then sepals. Okay, so this is a little bit weird because lilies are not the best example to show you what sepals are. So on the drawing we saw before, I showed you the sepals are like those little green things. Like if you ever have had like a flower, rose, right? Those little green leaves at the base of the rose, those are the sepals. In lilies, though, a lot of times the sepals, because of different reasons you don't need to know, evolutionary time, a lot of times the sepals in the lilies look like petals. But don't worry about that. It's just the point of this is whorls. Let's see, I think it was red for petals, right? Oops, no. Here's a petal here, and the sepals are below that because they're a different whorl. Yeah, and most of the time the sepals are green and look like little leaves. And their job is to protect the flower as it opens. Yeah, so if you look at this, here is a flower that has not opened yet. Oh, I shouldn't use red. Let's get out of that. Here's a flower that hasn't opened yet. And what you see there are the sepals. These are the sepals on the outside of that. And Just like we call all the petals together a corolla, we call all the sepals together a calyx. Calyx. So that's how you say this word here, calyx. Okay. Yes. So about whorls, right? Every flower is supposed to have 4 whorls, right? Not supposed to, but there are 4 total whorls that a flower could have. Starting from the inside, pistils, then stamens, pistils or carpals, then stamens, petals, and sepals. If you have all 4 of those whorls, you are what we call I'm going to use a different color. I'll use pink. You are what we call a complete flower. Complete flower is a flower that has all 4 of those whorls. So here is an example of a complete flower. It has the pistils or carpals. It has the stamens. It has petals. And it has sepals, right? So it has all 4 parts. It's a complete flower. If you're missing one or more of those whorls, one or more, you're what we call an incomplete flower. So in this example here, this flower only has 3 whorls. It has pistil / carpals, it has stamens, and then it has sepals that look like petals, but no actual petals. So that's an example. So if you're missing one or more whorls, you're what we call incomplete flower. So if you don't have petals, you're incomplete flower. If you don't have sepals, you're an incomplete flower. If you don't have stamens, you're an incomplete flower. If you don't have pistil or carpal, you're an incomplete flower. But it gets even more complicated from that, right? So complete and incomplete refer to number of whorls. Complete flowers have 4 whorls. Incomplete flowers have less than 4 whorls. That's it. Deals with whorls. And then we have these terms, perfect and imperfect. Perfect and imperfect refer to sex organs. So if you have both the stamens, if you have both stamens and pistils / carpals, both types of sex organs, you are what we call perfect. If you are missing one of the sex organs, you are what we call imperfect. So don't worry, I know it seems like a lot of like, what? But just try to keep it in mind like this. Complete versus incomplete has to deal with number of whorls. Perfect versus imperfect has to do with whether the flower has both sex structures or one or the other. If the flower only has stamens, we can call the flower staminate. If the flower only has carpals, we call it pistillate or carpellate. So in the bottom here, these are 2 flowers from the same species. However, this flower here only has stamens, whereas this flower here only has pistil or carpals and no stamens. And this is a situation you would have on a dioecious species. So if you have sexes in 2 houses, right, 2 different plants have the sex organs, that must mean that you have to have imperfect flowers on dioecious species because each flower on each tree only has one of the sex organs. Okay. Maybe this will make it a little, so this is kind of putting it all together. So this is our lemnaceae again. This is that smallest angiosperm that we saw on previous slide. So each lemnaceae plant produces only 1 flower, and the flower that it makes is incomplete and perfect. So you can describe a flower using both the complete, incomplete, and perfect and imperfect simultaneously. So let's just look at it. So this is an example of an incomplete perfect flower. So we have to think, what does it mean if it's incomplete? If it's incomplete, it's missing at least 1 whorl. And what does it mean if it's perfect? If it's perfect, it has both sex organs. And so what do we see here? Well, let's go here. Right. That's what I was just saying, right? So let's look at the flower. So it has 2 stamens and so it has stamens, and we could see the style there of the pistil/carpal. So we know it has female sex structures. So male sex structures, female sex structures. It has to be perfect, but there are no petals and there are no sepals. So this flower only has sex organs, and therefore it's missing 2 whorls, and that's why it's incomplete. So it's incomplete because it's missing petals and sepals. It is perfect because it has male and female sex structures. Okay. Enough about incomplete, complete, perfect, and imperfect. So don't get hung up on this too much, this part coming up. I just want to show this to you in case you happen to like see flowers in life and you can know something about them. So sometimes flowers can be sometimes flowers can be alone, just one flower per stem, which is the case of a rose, right? If you've ever had a rose, it's on one stem, one flower per stem. So those are solitary flowers, or you can say that they are born singly, right? We saw the term born singly when we were talking about needles of certain conifers, and we saw the term born singly when we were talking about lycopod leaves, right? But sometimes flowers can be grouped together in what we call an inflorescence. So on the right here, you see an example of this is something in a lily family. And for one stalk, you have many things, right? Here's one stalk, and look at all flowers you have, all these flowers, as versus here's a solitary flower with just one flower per stalk, as versus all of these flowers per the stalk. So inflorescence means you have multiple flowers per stalk. And again, I'm just going to show you a few types of inflorescences, but you don't need to know them for the exam, right? You don't need to know the types of inflorescence for exam. I just want you to see them. So these are different types. We'll go through them very quickly. In the pink drawings here, each circle that you see indicates a single flower. So here is what a panicle looks like. This is on the right here is a type of hydrangea, which is flowering right now in our region. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, panicle. Sometimes inflorescences are what we call a spike, like these lupine that we see here. A raceme is another type of inflorescence. Corum, which I think is pretty cool because it's like an upside down. Look. It's just a weird, cool shape because you have a flat top. And so it means all the stems have to be like slightly different sizes in order to achieve this. But the result is that you get this flat top, right? Flat. Pretty cool. So it's like a nice landing surface for pollinators. So corum. Then you have a simple umbel. So the first inflorescence we saw here, right, that thing in the lily family, is a type of an umbel. In an umbel, all of the little stems connect at a central point, and then the little stems kind of fan out. So this is a simple umbel, which means this is just one umbel. But you could also have a compound umbel, which is basically like an umbel of umbels. So like if each of these is one umbel, right? Compound umbel is like an umbel of umbels. Which is popular in the parsley carrot family that makes this type of a flower, right? Maybe Queen Anne's lace you may have heard of before. It's a common weedy species, grows along the side of roads. That's a type of a compound umbel as well. Okay. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but just so you know more about flower types. Catkin is another type of flower. This is popular, or this occurs on things like birch trees. But basically, they look a lot like Astrobolus. But believe it or not, these are actually flowers hanging down. And then this is cool. So a sunflower is what we call a composite flower. And believe it or not, a sunflower is an inflorescence. It's not one flower. It's actually many, many, many flowers, which I think I talked about when we were looking at the time lapse of sunflower. I think I did. But basically, there's two types of flowers on a sunflower. So it really should be called a sun inflorescence, not sunflower. On the center part, you have tons and tons of these, what are called disc flowers. And then surrounding that center part are these more colorful ray flowers. So if you do like a cross section through a sunflower, not cross section, longitudinal section through a sunflower, you can actually see this. So the disc flowers are all in the center, and then the ray flowers radiate around that center. Pretty cool. Nope, I don't want to annotate. I should point out about sunflower, so each of these things you see coming out of here is a stigma. And so each of these disc flowers will turn into a sunflower seed when it gets fertilized. All right. So we've covered habits, inflorescences, ecosystems where you can find angiosperms, parts of the flower, perfect, imperfect, complete, and incomplete flowers. Now let's talk about monocots versus dicot flowers. So we saw the terms monocots and dicots when we did the seed lab, right? Because monocots have one cotyledon and dicots have two cotyledons. So remember, we learned about them. So monocots and dicots also have different number of flower parts. So if you're a monocot plant, let's start with monocot plant, which is here. Monocot plants always have their flower parts. So when they say parts, they mean those whorls again. So they always have the parts of their whorls in threes. So for example, on a lily, you have these 3 petals. And underneath those, we have those 3 sepals. And then you might say, well, wait, I thought you said in threes because I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stamens. It's okay. It means in threes. So you can have 3 stamens or 6 stamens or 9 stamens or 12 stamens or 15 stamens, right? As long as it's something that's divisible by the number 3. Whereas dicots always have their flower parts or whorls arranged in 4s and 5s. So this flower on top has 5 petals, right? So we know it's a dicot. This flower on the bottom has 4 petals that we can see. So we know it's a dicot, etc. So if a plant had, let's go with 4s. If a plant had 16 petals and 16 stamens, right? Divisible by 4, so we know it is a dicot. If a flower had 20 petals, right? 20 stamens, 20 ovules, 20 of everything, we know that it's a dicot because it's divisible by 5, right? Or if a flower had, as I said before, like 12, it's divisible by 3, although it could be divisible by 4 too. So it could be a little tricky, right? 15 and 12 could be a little weird. But yes, 4s and 5s as versus 3s. Another way that dicot and monocot flowers are different is that the dicot flowers have 3 openings on their pollen, whereas monocots only have 1 opening on their pollen grain. And just to give you an idea of the diversity in pollen shape in the angiosperm, so all of these things here are pollen grains. Here is another nice schematic of angiosperm pollen grains, right? Like let's look at some of these guys here. Like this one kind of looks almost like a spaceship. This one almost looks like kind of like a fossil. This one almost looks like a scary like lizard. And this one, hey, that one, nope, that one doesn't belong. That's Mickey Mouse. This is not from an angiosperm. That's Mickey Mouse. We saw Mickey Mouse Mickey Mouse during the conifer lab, so we got to get that guy out of there. Nope. Go away. And it's not an angiosperm. Now, okay, so now all of these have just the angiosperm pollen grains. With such cool shapes, this is only just a few examples, right? There's tons and tons more. All right. So let's see how far along we are here. I think we're kind of getting to the meat of it all. Let's just see. Yeah, okay, cool. So we're already to the alternation of generations part of this class. After we talk about that, we'll talk about pollination, and then we'll be done. So let's talk about alternation of generations in the angiosperms. All right, and there's going to be some terms we've seen before that are going to come back into play now. So angiosperms can be monoecious or dioecious, right? If you're a monoecious plant, that means what does monoecious mean? Monoecious means the plant has both female and male sex structures on the same plant. Now, those could be in the same flower, or they could be in two different flowers as long as those two flowers are on the same plant. Because monoecious and dioecious refers to plant individual, whereas perfect and imperfect and things like that refer to a flower type. So if you are a monoecious plant, you have both sex organs on your same plant body, and those could be in the same flower, in which case that monoecious plant would have perfect flowers. Or that monoecious plant might have male and female flowers on its plant, in which case the monoecious plant would have imperfect flowers, but it's still a monoecious plant, right? Because it has both of them on it. Whereas dioecious plants can only have imperfect flowers. Dioecious plants can only have imperfect flowers, because each plant only has one type of sex organ on it. And just a recall, since you just learned these terms today, of the male reproductive structures and the female reproductive structures. Okay. Here on the right is an example of a perfect flower, right? It has both stamens and pistils. Pistils or carpals. And then on the right is an example of your imperfect flowers. Here, I'll just draw them quickly. Here is your female flower that has its pistils or carpals. And this is a flower that only has the male structures or stamens and releases pollen. So I'm just pointing that out because obviously the alternation of generations will be a little different depending on, meaning you could have one type of flower that has both male and female sex structures on the flower. You could have two separate flowers. For the purposes of our talk today about the alternation of generations, we're going to use an example of it with the perfect flower, just for simplicity. All right, so here's our flower. Again, if you see terms on this slide that I don't mention, you are not responsible for them. And in fact, you have the study guide, and I have in the study guide what terms I'm interested in you knowing about, right? So don't get scared if you see terms on here that I don't mention. If I don't mention them, you don't need to know them. All right, so first let's look at our whorls, right? We have our sepals, which in this case look like how they normally look in like little green leafy things. We have our colorful petals that attract pollinators. The next whorl we have is the stamens, right, which are here. And then the last in the center, we have the pistil or carpals, which is in the very, very center, right here. So I think first we talk about the pistil. Yeah, cool. So I have color-coded this with red to show you where on the diagram I'm talking about. So the pistil is the collective term for all the parts of the female reproductive structures, right? On the pistil, there is, as we already learned, now it's big. There's a stigma that catches pollen. Oops. Oh, yeah. So there's a stigma that catches pollen. And yeah, so there's a ton of diversity and even stigma shape. A lot of different diversity in stigma shape. Sometimes you could have a lot of different branches. Like look, this one at the tip is like lots and lots of little pieces. This stigma has like 2 that then divide again. Look at this stigma. Look at this one. So a lot of diversity in stigma shape. Here's pictures so you can see a little bit of it. I think this one's really cool. Like this is, oh, I guess I shouldn't use pink. Yeah, here. Oh, I'll just get out of it here. Boy, the street is very loud tonight. Okay, yeah. So this one's super cool. Look at these like pom-pom shaped ones, really pretty. All right, so stigma catches pollen, right? You could even see, I think you could even see on this part right here, those little dots, those are pollen that the stigma has, that have stuck to the stigma in that species. All right, so stigma catches pollen. Style is the tube thing that extends the stigma out of the flower, and then ovary is what holds the ovules in the container, right, of the angiosperms. Okay. And even though, so the, sorry, my other, okay. So not only are the angiosperm ovules more protected because they're inside of an ovary, they're also even more protected because they have these more layers. They have more layers, you don't need to know term, than before. So multiple layers plus they're inside of an ovary. Okay, so inside, yes, we gotta talk about this. So we're going to talk about what's going on inside of the ovule of angiosperms. So inside of the angiosperm ovule is the female Gametophyte plant. And the female Gametophyte plant has been further reduced than we saw even before, right? It's even more reduced now. And it only consists of 8 cells. Only consists of 8 cells. And again, if there's terms on this slide that I don't mention, you don't need to know that. So female Gametophyte plant is now even smaller, such that she's only made up of 8 cells. Some of those cells that I do want you to know are these 2 polar nuclei, which are located right here, and an egg cell, which is located right here, right? You have to have an egg. If you're a female Gametophyte plant, you're going to have an egg somewhere. And often the egg will be located where the opening of the ovule is. So if you could see here, I think we learned the term micropyle in the seed lab, but I think we've come across at some point. You don't need to know micropyle or end, but just know that this is a hole, right? This is an opening in the ovule. And that's where the sperm is going to be able to get in to fertilize the egg. So female Gametophyte plant now consists only of 8 cells. And some of those cells that we are interested in are these 2 polar nuclei and an egg cell. Oh yeah. And unfortunately, a female Gametophyte plant is now called Embryo Sac, which I don't particularly care for, but you might see it on a diagram somewhere. So it's like pollen sac I can get. Yeah, never mind. So, okay. What happened? So here we cut through an ovary. This is cut through an ovary on the left, and we could see the ovules inside. So here is the wall of the ovary here, container. And then each of these round things inside are an ovule, each of these globs, right? It's an ovule. Here on the right is a close-up of an ovule from that same ovary. And so that's where the female Gametophyte plant is going to be inside of that ovule, right? Inside of each of these ovules, there's going to be female Gametophyte plant, but only consists of 8 cells. So the ovule, we don't need to know about ovule development, but just know eventually it's mature. And when it's mature, there you go. There's your female Gametophyte plant inside. Remember, the egg is usually going to be near the opening. So that's where it is here. So here's your egg cell again. And here's your 2 polar nuclei. Okay, so what's going to happen? So that's the female reproductive structures. Now let's talk about the male reproductive structures, right? The stamens. And if you just, even this diagram here is good because it kind of shows you everything. So here's a stamen. What is a stamen made of? It's made of a filament which holds up an anther. And the anther is going to be a group of microsporangia, term we've already come into contact with. And the microsporangia, just like we saw in the gymnosperms, is going to make pollen grains, right? Okay. So let's go to the next, right? So here you go. Here's your stamens, which are made up of the anthers, which produce the pollen, and the filament that holds the anthers out of the flower. So just like the female Gametophyte plant was more reduced, right? Only eats cells big. The male Gametophyte plant is also more reduced in that it's only now 2 cells. It's only made up of 2 cells. And the cells are a cell called a pollen tube cell, which is going to grow a pollen tube, as you might have guessed from the name. And then a cell that generates 2 sperm cells. So it's called the generative cell, but just know there's a cell that grows a pollen tube and a cell that generates 2 sperm. And those pollen grains are going to be, that male Gametophyte plant is initially going to be, or is going to be, inside of these pollen sacs that we've already talked about, right? Inside the microsporangia. So just so we know where we're talking about, remember the male parts are called the anthers, and the filaments, or together the stamens. Here is one anther here. Here is a filament holding it up. If we were to do a cross section through the anther, like we did here, and look at it, you'd see that, so this is one microsporangium. This is one microsporangium. And so when you cut it in half, you can see this anther has 4 microsporangia, and that's where your male Gametophyte plants are initially going to be, right? Inside the microspores there. Right, remember, microspores are, here, let's go back. Right. So remember, a microspore it's just like we talked about before. Like the microspore is going to have inside of it the male Gametophyte plant. But the male Gametophyte plant now is only 2 cells. Like I said, pollen tube cell and a cell that makes 2 sperm cells. Those, all that together, right? The microspores with the male Gametophyte inside are going to be inside of these microsporangia, right? Right, inside of these microsporangia. Okay, so how do we get from those to pollen grain? So here's another cross section through an anther. It's the same type that we saw before in that there's 4 microsporangia. Oh, I think I already have it drawn here. Let's see. Yep, 4 microsporangia of this anther. Inside of each of those microsporangia are going to be the 2N microspore mother cells. Those are going to undergo meiosis to make your spores, right? Your microspores. And then, like we talked about, I think in the gymnosperms, the microspores are going to undergo mitosis to end up having a total of 2 cells inside. One is the, and now we call it a pollen grain. Once that happens, we call it a pollen grain. So one cell inside of the pollen grain is going to be the pollen tube cell that grows pollen tube. One cell is going to be the cell that generates 2 sperm cells. All right, so now we know where the egg is. We know where the sperm is going to come from. So let's put it together. So eventually the pollen grains are going to be ready. And so the anther is going to open up and release the pollen grains out. So here we go. We got a pollen grain. So here's the anther. It opened and released pollen grain, right? It's going to release that from the anther, and then that pollen grain is going to be brought to the tip of a sticky stigma via what we call an agent of pollination. Ooh, sounds, agent of pollination. It sounds like 007. No, yeah, so agent of pollination, we talked about in the Gymnosperm lab. Wind is the primary agent of pollination in the Gymnosperms, although you do sometimes have insects in the Cycads. But in flowers, there's a lot of different types of agents of pollination. So remember, pollination is when you have the pollen grain go from the anther. In angiosperms, pollination is when you have the pollen grain go from the anther to the top of the stigma. Boom, pollination done. Pollination done. So once this pollen grain lands on top of a stigma, pollination. Look, here you go, pollination. Oops, done. Pollination over. Here's the top of a stigma. And all of those yellow dots are pollen grains. So pollination has occurred. And here we're going to see some nice slides of agents of pollination. So agents of pollination are the things that bring pollen from an anther to a stigma. They can be abiotic agents like water and wind, and they can be biotic agents, which we'll look at here. Insects, birds, reptiles, small mammals, and even bats. So here is an example of an abiotic type of agent of pollination. On the left, you see wind. On the right, you see water vectoring the pollen. Oops. Obviously, oops. Okay. Obviously, you can have insects be the vector of the pollen, right? So the agent of pollination. Look at this bee. Look at this bee over here. Loaded with pollen, right? But other insects as well. Wasps, butterflies, moths can all be agents of pollination. Believe it or not, beetles can also be agents of pollination. Look how much pollen is on this guy here. Whoa, a lot. Flies can be agents of pollination. Birds can be agents of pollination. Look at this little hummingbird. Reptiles can be agents of pollination. And then I love this slide. And then small mammals, right? Bats and others. So look at this bat. Oh man, they love this bat. Look at this guy having a good day. But yeah, bats they might be trying to eat the nectar that's deep inside of the flower and end up getting just covered in pollen. And then these little, I guess these are little mice things, are also agents of pollination. So, like I said, once the pollen grain lands on top of the sticky stigma, you have pollination occur, right? Pollination. Then what, right? Pollination is not fertilization. It's a different process. So what happens after pollination? Well, the first thing that's going to happen is the pollen grain, which remember has two cells in it, a tube cell, pollen tube cell, and a cell that makes sperm. That's on top of the stigma. First thing that's going to happen is that pollen tube cell is going to grow or germinate down the surface of the style, down the style. I'll draw it on the next slide. I think it might make a little more sense. Yeah, so the pollen tube cell is going to germinate, and the pollen tube is going to grow downwards toward the ovules. So here you go. Here's a pollen grain. The pollen tube cell has already started to grow, and these two sperm cells can now start to move down into the ovary and ultimately into an ovule. Yeah, and the sperm no longer swims here. The sperm no longer swim. They'll get pulled along as the pollen tube cell grows. The two sperm cells will just kind of move down as it moves down. So there you go. This is what I'll say. I'll draw it here because it makes a little bit more sense. So here's the pollen grain. It landed. It's going to grow a pollen tube cell that's going to elongate all the way down, ultimately getting to an ovule. Inside of that pollen tube cell are 2 sperm that will ultimately go all the way down to meet the ovule. Once the pollen tube cell enters the opening of the ovule, then the 2 sperm cells are going to get released into the ovule. When that happens, so here you go. Pollen tube cell has entered the opening of the ovule. The 2 sperm cells now get released into the ovule. And waiting there is an egg and these 2 polar nuclei. One sperm, so if you look this here, right, in this schematic, the sperm is kind of like a purple color, and the egg and polar nuclei are kind of a brownish color, at least on my monitor they are. So one sperm is going to fuse with the egg to make the 2N zygote, right? Because the sperm is 1N, the egg is 1N, and so the result is going to be a 2N zygote, right? We've already talked about many times. The other sperm is going to actually fuse with these 2 polar nuclei to make endosperm. Endosperm. And you might say, what? Wait a minute, this is a typo, Rebecca, because he says 3N here. Well, yeah, because think about it. You have 1 sperm cell, which is 1N, and each polar nuclei is 1N. So when they all 3 fuse together, the result is a triploid or 3N product. And this product happens to be called endosperm. And endosperm, we'll talk about here, is a food source for the growing baby plant. So we call this thing that happens in angiosperms double fertilization, because you have 2 fertilization events happening in one female gametophyte plant by 2 sperm cells. The first sperm cell fuses with an egg to make the 2N zygote, which will grow into the new sporophyte plant. The other sperm cell fuses with the polar nuclei to make the food source for the growing baby plant, which we call the food source, which we call endosperm. So just as a reminder, remember in the gymnosperms, there were also 2 sperm cells, and there were, at that time, there was actually 2 egg cells too. And remember, in the gymnosperms, the one sperm would fertilize and the other sperm would get discarded, and that one of the eggs would get discarded too. So it's kind of wasteful. So this double fertilization in angiosperms is more efficient because everything's going to get used, right? Like both sperm are going to get used. We're going to end up with a baby plant and a food source for the baby plant. So more efficient. Okay. Enough of me talking. Let's look at some videos. So first, we got to learn a little bit about flowers to fruits. So on the top here, believe it or not, every time you see a flower, that flower is going to turn into a fruit. And every time you've seen a fruit or something that has a seed in it, that was at some point a flower. Yes, that's true. So look at the top here. This is an apple flower shown in A. And actually you can see this long thing here is the style, and all these little shorter things around it are the anthers. So you have fertilization occur. Now what was ovules are now going to become seeds, and what was a flower is going to become the fruit. So once the ovule is no longer an ovule and it's a seed now, the ovary walls are going to start to swell. So let's look here. Here's ovary walls here. They're going to start to swell, bigger and bigger and bigger until ultimately you end up with, in this case, an apple, right? Containing seeds. What do I want you to know here? Yeah, it's just mainly I want you to know that you're getting from a flower, you're getting a fruit. That's what I want you to know, right? Here's another example in raspberry or blackberry, where you have a flower. Yeah, look here. Here's a flower. This is it before it opened, right? There we can see the sepals on the outside. And then once this gets fertilized and the ovules or seeds, will go on to become this. So it's one thing, and then ultimately this. So it's one thing to look at pictures, but it's funner to watch it happen with time lapse. So let's pull this up to here. Yep, let's make it big. I think the color will fix once I make it big. Go big. Hey, here, hold on. There we go. Sorry. So those are pear flowers. And actually, I'll pause it real quick. Oh yeah, we'll see them again. So look there. So look there. They were opening, right? They were opening. Here's the sepals. They were just protecting the outside. We're starting to see the petals. And as they open, hey, as they open, you'll see inside. Those purple things are the stamens. Look, and once they open, they turn yellow because the pollen is yellow. And in the center, those green things are the stigma, right? So remember, this is time lapse. You can see there's a little bug flying around there. So now the petals have fallen off. Fertilization has occurred. And then look at this one right here. You see the base of it starting to swell. And oops, and that is your beginning of your pear. Pretty cool. Let's see what else we got. The other one I wanted to show you, I can get to it here because I'll move this, is here. And remember, all of these links to these videos are also available on Blackboard in the course documents folder. Okay, let's see if this will work. I don't know why it's doing the green. Maybe you guys don't see the green, but I see green on my end. Okay, so yeah, this is a time lapse. So this is a bell pepper plant. You saw that person just go like that real quick. They did fertilization, or so they pollinated it with a little brush. And look, this one just opened. Pollen has, so now it's starting to go, look at the one on top, right? So it's starting to swell into the bell pepper. And there you go. It's starting to look like a bell pepper now. Right? Pretty cool. And then eventually the remaining part of the flower will fall off of the end of the bell pepper. Yeah, this goes on for quite a while. But you get the idea. Yeah, so look at there. You had a flower and then boom, now you have a bell pepper. So sometimes I get the question from students, well, you know, is a tomato a fruit or a flower or a vegetable, etc. And I think I touched on it in the first class, but if I didn't, if it has a seed in it, it's technically a fruit, botanically speaking. So a pepper is a fruit. A squash is a fruit. Anything that had a seed in it at some point is a fruit, right? Tomato is a fruit. And then you say, well, what's a vegetable? Well, a vegetable is like lettuce or a scallion or a carrot. Something that's not something that doesn't have a seed in it is a vegetable. Yeah, so there you go. So those videos are available on Blackboard for you to watch. But yeah, so that's the whole point here, is that you had here's the whole alternation of generations summed up on one slide. You know, shows you the female parts on the left here. Shows you the male parts next to it here, stamen. Pollen grain leaves the anther, lands on the stigma. Pollen tube cell grows down the style, bringing with it 2 sperm. Pollen tube cell enters an ovule, which is inside of an ovary. 2 sperm cells enter the ovule. 1 fuses with an egg, 1 fuses with polar nuclei. The result is 2N zygote, 3N endosperm. And that's what you have inside of your seed. And the seed will eventually grow into the ovary will eventually swell into a fruit containing seeds. The seeds eventually will get released and grow into the new plant. Okay. Whew, I think we are basically done. There's one thing I wanted to show you guys. So first of all, I know all of you are, already doing your thing, and you have a certain major, and you had to satisfy a science requirement, and so you took a plant class, which I hope you've enjoyed somewhat. But just in case whatever you're working on doesn't work out for you, or you just are tired of what you're doing and want to look into something new, there are a lot of careers working with plants. So if you are like, this plant thing's kind of interesting, I've put this link on Blackboard, and there's resources there to learn about different careers with plants, just so you know. And then, last but not least, we're going to watch this video here. And actually, because the sound, we're going to watch it. I'm going to watch it. Let me get out of here. No, I actually, the link is available on Blackboard. Watch that link there. I think you'll really enjoy this video. There's a very, very good introduction at the beginning where the man is speaking, and I don't want, the sound quality never works when I record it here. So please watch this video. I think you'll get a lot out of it. It's very beautiful. That he uses very amazing high-speed photography, videography, really close-up pictures of animals. So please look at this. The link is on Blackboard. Okay. Whew. That is the last class. We've finished basic plant science classes for the semester. And there is, of course, because there's a homework assignment for every class, there is a homework assignment for this class. It'll be available today. If you're watching this on Tuesday, it'll be available today at 8 p.m. And it's due by Thursday at 6 p.m. Okay, that's for the homework assignment. So now we have to talk about the exam. So normally we would have had, if we had in-person classes, normally we would have had the exam on Thursday, right? And normally I like to give you guys a time block to complete the exam because not everybody is available on Thursday at 6 p.m. And normally the time block that I give people is 2 days, but that would put our exam due on the 4th of July. And I'm not going to do that. No, we're not doing that. So instead, what I'm going to do for the exam is the exam will be available on Thursday starting at 6 p.m., just like normal. But it won't be due until Monday, the 6th. So you have 4 days to complete the exam. And it will be due by 6 p.m. on Monday, right? So it'll be available starting Thursday, but it won't be due until Monday the 6th. There's a study guide on, yes, you're welcome. There's a study guide on Blackboard that has been posted since the 20th, right? And today's class is on, let's see, the 30th? Yeah. So the study guide's been posted for 10 days, and you have additional time to complete the exam. So I expect the exam grades to be very, very good, and I expect all exams to be turned in on time because we're not having any late exam submissions, especially since I'm giving you this additional time. So no late submissions are accepted or graded, but you're welcome for having additional time. All exams will be due Monday by 6 p.m. Monday the 6th. All right. Well, with that, guys, I just want to say it's been my pleasure to teach you about plants this summer, and I really, really do wish you all the best in everything that you pursue. And I know there's a lot going on right now, and I'm sorry about that. But, it's important that we all stay strong and we all follow our dreams, and we don't give up, and we just keep pushing, right? So I wish you all so much great success in all that you pursue. If there's anything I could ever do to help, let me know. And I just want to thank you so much for having just a great class and for a really great summer. And I hope you have a really great summer. So take care, guys, and stay strong. All right. How do? Oh, then I have to find how to turn it off. Oh, one day we'll have in-person classes again. Bye, guys. Take care.